Hi everyone and welcome to World Ocean Day for Schools 2023. My name's Anna, I'm here today with my colleague Eric and we both work at the Blue Marine Foundation. We are here today in the lovely labs at the Marine Science Institute of Portsmouth University.
Our labs here are at our local blue space. Just out of these windows here you can see the Solent.
So before we head out into the sunshine to our blue space, we'd like to tell you all a little bit more about the European native oyster, which is our special species of the day. They form a really important part of Blue Marine's Solent Oyster Restoration Project, and Eric is our expert on the project and he's going to tell you a few more fun facts about them.
Yeah, so our oysters here are a mollusk. Now that puts them in the same group of animals as a snail or a mussel or a limpet. So these oysters though are a bivalve mollusk, which means they have two shells. In between them is their soft body. So all of the mollusks, like snails, have a soft body with a hard shell, usually on the outside. Now in between those two shells is where we have our little gap that you can see in there, and that's where the oyster lives. So it sits between the two shells, and we used to have millions and millions and millions of these oysters all around the coastline of the whole of the UK. But unfortunately, they're now rather endangered and in need of our help. Unfortunately, our oysters have been overfished using destructive techniques over the last 100 years or so.
So this overfishing, I know that in the last 100 years we've got better and better at fishing, we've had more industrial methods. We basically are collecting too many oysters too quickly so that they can't thrive and grow. Is this the only thing that's causing the oysters to struggle, or is there more? There
is more to it. So in our local blue space, there's other invasive species and lots of pollution. This means that the oysters really struggle to thrive with these added stresses that are put onto them.
There is a lot of pollution here in the Solent, but these oysters here are one of our best friends in trying to tackle this. We've got a tank here with about 5 native oysters in, including one really big one. We're going to leave this experiment running all day so you can see just how amazing they are at filter feeding. The oysters suck in water using their 2 valves or shells. They then filter it through their gills, taking out the algae, which they use as food, and also taking out all of the pollution and chemicals that we have here. Hopefully by the end of the day, this tank will be completely clear. We're going to come back and show you at the end of the lesson.
So not only are we restoring these oysters here in the Solent to clean up our waters, but also to help bring back some biodiversity to the area.
And biodiversity is so important here in the Solent as it is around the world. So biodiversity just means the variety of living things. The more animals and plants you have, the more different types, the more biodiversity you tend to have. These oysters are fantastic for attracting biodiversity because they build a reef-like structure under the water. Hundreds or even thousands of them, when they're healthy, can group together and build this 3D reef with lots of nooks and crannies for other animals to hide in. They might be hiding from their predators or sneaking upon their prey, but this 3D structure is really, really important for other animals and biodiversity here in the Solent.
And with that, let's go and check out some of our oysters. Right now, we're standing on top of one of our hatches, Anna, and if you give me a hand on the other end, we can get this up so we can see what we've got underneath.
Some seaweed
Go.
already.
Seaweed straight away. We've just taken one of our oyster cages out and we've pulled it up with our net, so hopefully we should have some little crawly, swimmy around things down there in the bottom. But what the oysters actually live in inside the cage is a plastic structure like that, so you can see how many we have, each with their own little house
Like
on
an
the
oyster
inside.
hotel.
Yeah. And then we can get the net out and see what we've got in the bottom.
So you can see just here we've got what looks like a baby shore crab. And as we mentioned earlier, these oysters are really great for providing habitat for other species. So this crab was probably in here to hide away from its predators. As you can see, it's only very little, just hiding away there in the net. So this would be quite vulnerable to predators like bigger crustaceans or potentially fish. So it's hidden away within the oysters as a nice safe place.
Let's see if we've got any in the seaweed here. Here we go. So here's a small little gammarus species. Now this is like a woodlouse that lives in the sea is what you can think of it as. But you see it wriggling around there. So these are really good food for lots of juvenile fish species, really important species that you see on your plate quite a lot. So sea bass and all things that you'd eat for dinner. All of the juvenile baby versions of those fish will come and swim along and eat up these little gammarus, the little woodlouse things.
And this is their first check. We hadn't been to see these oysters yet, so we're glad to see that most of them are still alive. We won't see any growth yet for a few months or maybe even a few years, but they're looking good. They're looking pretty healthy. Mm-hmm. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I'm really impressed with the survival so far, because at this point when they are reproducing, that takes quite a lot of energy and uses up a lot of the oyster's reserves. So at this time of year they can be quite worn down or weakened by the fact that they've had to put all of that energy and effort into reproducing. So yeah, it's really encouraging that they're all doing so well. They all look very healthy and very clean.
Amazing. And how many cages like this are in this marina?
So just along this pontoon we have 15 different cages.
Wow.
Yeah, and each of them has 45 oysters in. So altogether we have thousands so far that we've restored, and we're looking to do even more with our actual reef locations as well as our cages.
And what happens once these oysters reproduce? Where do their larvae go?
So the oyster larvae, once they're floating around in the water in the solent, they'll then start looking for the right surface to settle on, because once these guys settle down, that's it, they've chosen their spot for life, so they won't move around once they're settled.
And as part of the wider environment, these oysters are obviously a very important part, but could you tell everyone watching today a little more about the Solent Seascape project and how you're integrating these oysters into something much, much bigger?
So we're putting all of these different habitats that we find in the Solent all back together, connecting them and hopefully being able to help each other. So the oysters can filter the water, that makes it cleaner for the seagrass, so the seagrass can grow better. So they all are interlinked, and our Seascape project is really looking to pull the best parts of these different habitats together to create a full, healthy, happy ecosystem again.
So we want the whole of the Solent Seascape to be back to where it once was. And one of the best things about that is that many of the habitats you've mentioned, so the salt marsh and the seagrass, and possibly the oysters, but we need to do a bit more research before we can be sure, are known as blue carbon habitats, which means that they're great for fighting against climate change.
Yeah, so they'll be drawing down carbon from the atmosphere through the water in the food they eat, and then locking it away in the shell as they grow. So that carbon that gets stored in the shell, once that stays on the seabed, will be locked away forever. So hopefully we can do a real bonus towards dealing with climate change with all of the different habitats that we're restoring.
And of course, many species as well need several of these habitats to survive. So there are lots of species, for example, a sea bass, which might need some seagrass at one point of its life cycle. It needs the open sea and others. There's lots of interconnectivity, and a lot of these species are very migratory. So they move around a lot throughout their life cycle and throughout the year. Everything really is interconnected.
It truly is, yeah.
That's why it's so important to see the Solent seascape as a whole system rather than looking at each element individually.
Wow, I mean, we've learned so much today, and let's see what our oysters have been up to whilst we've been out. I mean, look how much cleaner that water looks. Absolutely amazing.
They look brilliant, and you might be wondering how you could get involved in the rewilding and restoration of your sea. First of all, we want you to write to your MP. Tell them what you want for your blue space. Secondly, you could come and volunteer with us down at the Solent Oyster Restoration Project or another citizen science project near you. We also want you to read more, watch more, be curious about your blue space. And last but not least, remember to tell your friends and family about the humble native oyster, the secret superhero of the sea.